For some of you, a thumbnail is not going to be large enough for what you want to do. So in this tutorial, we're going to be setting up a scaled bitmap to match the size of our image view. Welcome to Mobile Application Tutorials. My name's Nigel. Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to be actually creating a file and using the camera application to write a full-size bitmap image to that file. And when we load that file, we're going to scale it so it matches a size similar to our image view for performance reasons. Okay, so we'll make a start. Okay, one of the first things you want to do if you're going to be sharing a file across to another application, such as a camera application, we're going to have to create what's called a shareable content URI, which has shareable permissions that can be used by other applications. And to do that, we use a file provider. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a file provider, and you do that in your Android manifest file, and it will happen inside the application tag. And so we're going to create a provider. And the authorities is just a name that we can share with the source code when we want to access a particular file provider. So in this case, I'm going to use the package name and append .fileProvider to it. So I can get the file provider by using the syntax. So application ID, closing brackets, and then just append file provider. Now the Android name does have to be done in this format. Android.support.v4.content.file provider. We're going to set up a few more flags here. We're going to export it as false, so we're not going to export that file in the provider as such, but we're going to do it using a shareable content URI. And we're going to grant permissions, and this is what's required for our content URI, and we're going to set that to true. In other words, shareable permissions. Okay, and we need to close that tag. And inside the provider, I'm going to create some metadata. And for Android resource, we need to set the flag for our Android resource. That's going to be the location of our file that holds the details of the locations of where our files are that we want to share. So I'm going to create a new resource directory folder, and inside that I'm just going to call the file path. And we also need to set up a name for this, and the name for this will be Android support file provider paths. We need to close that tag. Okay, you notice that we're getting an error here. That's because we don't yet actually have an XML resource file directory yet, or have we created a file path.xml file inside that. So we'll create those two now. So go into your resource folder here, select that, right click, go to new, then go to Android resource directory. And I'm going to, in the resource type, I'm going to select XML and then just OK. So we've got the XML part. Now we need to create a file inside that directory. So right click on that directory and XML resource file. And the name that we're going to call this does have to match file paths here. So file paths. OK. Design tab showing. I just want text here. I'm going to remove these 3 lines, they aren't required. And now we need to create a pass tag. close that, and inside there we're going to create an external files path. This is required basically in this example. The files we're creating are going to be local to the application, so if you delete the application the files get removed. So the name for this, I'm just going to call this the intent images. You can call this whatever you want. Inside path, this is because we're using the external files path here, where which is showing up as the root directory in our application. It is recognized if we use pictures, and we can close that tag. Now let me just talk about that. So path equals pictures. So path is a recognizable pictures is a recognizable folder in our root directory, and in the source code we're going to be getting, there's a matching application name, API name that matches external files path that we can use. So it makes it easier for us just in the API call just to add a storage directory that matches this particular location here, or else you'd actually have to end up typing the full path itself, the Android path, which can be quite long, but it's doable. Okay, so if we go back to our Android manifest file, and as you probably saw there, my IDE is a bit slow. We're no longer seeing the error for file paths, so that part is working okay. So now we need to go into the source code and actually start implementing the code for our file and setting up a shareable URI for that. Okay, so we need to go into the main activity. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a function that just creates our file. And I'll call it function create image file, and it's going to return a file. Okay, now I need to create some variables for this. One thing, we're going to be creating a number of files. You want this application to support a number of files. Each file is going to have its own unique name, and one way to do that is to create a timestamp. So we're going to create a timestamp. And we've got SimpleDateFormat as an API that we can use to create a unique timestamp string. And then here I'm just going to do for the years, months are going to be uppercase, days, and I'm going to add an underscore, then create hours in uppercase, minutes, seconds. And I'm also going to add a locale here. It's more API compatible with the later version of the API. And then we need to format that, and I'm going to use the date object to format that. Now we're going to create an actual image file name, and this is going to be appended to the first part of the file name. So again, it's another value. I'll just call this image file name, and I'm going to append JPEG just to the front in uppercase. Add an underscore there to make the readability of the file name a bit easier. Now we can add our timestamp, and we'll add a underscore to the end of that timestamp just to make it easier to read the code. Now we want to create a storage directory that represents the location of where the file is going to reside. Okay, so we can use a get command for that. getExternalFilesDir, and inside here I'm going to create an environment just to get the pictures directory. As we've done here. Okay, get external files directory and environment pictures. If we go back to our filepath.xml, they match the external file paths here with the path pictures here. So it makes it quite a clean way in this particular example for setting up our storage that's internal to the application. Okay, one thing we want to do here, because directory pictures may not yet be created in our application, so we need to check to see if that's created. So if not we call storage directory. So if it doesn't exist, as the API says here, we need to create it. So call storage dir and create the directories. Notice how I'm using make dir's make dirs method here. What this will do is if any of the parent folders aren't created, this will create it for us as well. So it's quite a handy API. Okay, now we've got all the values in place to actually create our file. And so we'll call this image file equals, and let me just append a value in front of that. And now we can call create, we're going to be creating a temp file here, and this is going to take all our values. The first value here is going to be a prefix, and that's going to be the image file name. Suffix is going to be like .jpg. .jpg should be fine. And then we enter our storage directory. Okay, now that we've got the image file, I want to actually get the path for that image file and put it into a activity member so we can reuse it for another method. So we're going to values here. I'm going to create. Now, one thing to note is I won't be able to initialize this variable when I create it because I won't know the value. It gets created all the time. So this is going to be a writable value and it's going to be initialized a bit later. So we've got the late init we can use to initialize at a later stage. Now it's going to be a writable variable, so we can call vir for that, so we can write to it at any time. The values .var here, they can only be set up, initialized once, and you can't write over them. Okay, and I'll call this the image file path. And we need to set up a type for that, which is going to be string. Okay, now we can go back and call our image file path. And we get the path from the image file. And it's the absolute path. So we've now set that up. And bear with me, I've got an error here. I've got to put the closing brackets there for the functions. You require those for functions. Okay, so the final part here is we're expecting to return a file, and so we'll return the image file. Okay, that's fine. One thing that you'll notice different in Kotlin than if you're coding this in Android is if we look at the createTempFile and we press F1 and I drag this across to my monitor, you'll notice it gets an exception down here from input-output error, and so we'll have to put some code, would have to throw that inside this function, but inside Kotlin there's no checked exceptions, but we do want to capture that. Some of you might have problems creating a file, so we do want to capture that just in case that happens. So what I'm going to do in Kotlin here is I'm going to use the throws exception, similar to what we do in Java. So this is the context I use here. Throws, and inside brackets we select, it's going to be an IO exception, and we just need to use the colon call class here. And that's purely for when we create the temp file. And we'll handle that from when we call the create image file. So we'll probably set up a toast that says something's gone wrong, we couldn't create the file, which is what you want to happen, just to handle any potential issues of when you're trying to create files. Okay, so we've done that. So actually let's set up the code for where we call this create image file. And so again, this happens in the set on click listener here. So the first thing we want to do is to create a file. It'll be a value, and we'll call it image file equals create the image file. Okay, and as we just mentioned here, it's going to be throwing an IO exception. So let's put a trap harness around that. Okay, so we're now capturing that in case anything goes wrong. So if something does go wrong inside here, I'm just going to basically put a simple toast saying that we couldn't create the file. Could not create file. And nothing else is going to happen in this application. We're not going to move forward because we can't do anything. We can't create the file for this particular case. And set the duration for that. And show the toast. Okay. Now, I need to move these lines of code here. I'll highlight them. I need to move these lines inside our trap harness. Okay, so we've got our intent here. So we need to do a few more things here. We've created the image file here. Now we need to create a shareable content URI and pass the details of the URI into the intent. So the camera application will know, oh, okay, you've provided me with a path that you want me to save the full-size image to. So we'll do that. So we need to create our shareable URI. So the first thing I'm going to do in here is to get the authorities that's required for creating a shareable URI. Equals get package name. And I can just call package name in this case for Kotlin. And now we want to append.file provider for our authorities string. Okay, it's a good idea to actually check this authorities. If we go back into the Android manifest file, check them against the authorities here. The names do have to match. So we've got file provider here, file provider, file provider. That should be okay. Okay, now the next step is to actually create our URI, shareable content URI. And I'll call this image URI. To get that, we call the file provider. And get URI for file. Contents of this, we pass in authorities. And now we pass in our image file that we just created there. Okay, so now this image URI can be shared across to other applications. So we can just put it into our intent. So call camera intent and put extra. And inside here, we're just going to need to make a call to the media store. Let's try that again. Media store flag called extra output. And now we can pass that image URI into that, as we've done here. And that's fine. The information's now gone into the intent, so we're good for that. And we can keep the remainder of the code here. We're just passing the intent with the request code to that camera application. So what this code will do is when you click it, we create the shareable content URI along with this gets passed into intent. And so the camera application will have the details of that URI. It will know it's got to save a full-size bit image to that URI. So and then it will return back to this application. Okay, so now we're going to handle it. What we're going to handle is the condition in case the bitmap image is way too large. We could get an exception, a memory exception error. And we're going to show a good practice of loading a bitmap that matches the actual size we want. And the size we want is the dimensions of the image view. So we want a bitmap that resembles as a close match for that. And so I'm going to set up a function that sets up the code that loads a reduced size if it can be if supported to the image view. So we'll create a new function down here. And I'll call this set scaled bitmap. And it's going to return a bitmap. And again, I've got to learn in Kotlin to put the closing brackets. Okay, so what we have to do here is we've got to know the dimensions of our image view first, and then work out the dimensions of our bitmap, and work out the difference in size, which will be our scale or scale factor. So we'll call value, I'll just call this image view width equals, and I need to go back to my activity.main.xml because I've forgotten the name of the ID for the image view. It's photo image view. And we can just call width in Kotlin instead of get width, which is handy. And we'll do the same thing for the height. Okay, so we've got those two values there. Now we need to get the size of the bitmap, the width and the height of the bitmap. And what we're going to do here is we're going to be doing what's called a dummy read. We're just going to scan the information of the bitmap without actually going through the overhead of loading the bitmap. And so to do that first, we need to create a bitmap options object. So I'll call this bitmap options, and equals, we can get this from the bitmap factory, and call options, the closing brackets there. Okay, now we just want to do a scan the details of the bitmap without actually loading the bitmap, and to do that we call the bitmap options we've just created ingest decode bounds, and we set that to true, and it's like a dummy read. Okay, now we can actually feed that into, we can go through the simulation of creating a file just to load the bitmap options with the details of the bitmap. So we call bitmap factory, and decode file path, and this is where we're going to feed in our bitmap options. And we do have the path name because we've set, that's why we set that up here, image file path, with our bitmap options. Okay, and by calling this, we're now going to populate the bitmap options with the details of the bitmap, including the width and the height that we want. So now we can set up the value for bitmap width equals bitmap options, and it's basically out width for width, and we'll do the same thing for the height. I just noticed a typo here, let me fix that. And we do need to change this so I don't get to height. Okay, so we've now got the dimensions of both our image view and our bitmap. Now we can calculate the scale, and we'll call it scale factor, difference, the difference in size. So we'll call this value scale factor, and I want to work out the minimum scale so I don't lose any quality in the image. To help with that, I'm going to use the math.min API, And we're going to just work out which is the smallest scale, but using either the width or the height. So we'll do the width first. So it's going to be the bitmap width, and we'll divide that by the ImageView width, just to get the width scale. And we'll do the same thing for the height as well. And so basically we want to get the lower scale, this to if there is a particular one, differences in dimensions, and that will give us a scale factor. We can now pass that scale factor into bitmap options, into the in-sample size here, because basically we're just doing a sample read, we're not actually loading the bitmap, equals scale factor. Now we've got all the information here to actually load a scaled bitmap if necessary, not the full size bitmap. So we can just call return. So we want to return a bitmap, bitmap factory. I've just forgotten one very important thing. So let me delete this line. Notice on this line here, in just two decode bounds is true. So we're only doing a sample scan. I have to reset that back to false so we can actually load the bitmap image, or else I will have big problems. In this decode bounds, we need to set that to false. Now we can return the bitmap. And again, it's calling bitmap factory. Decode file, image file path, with bitmap options. And let me add the bitmap options just to reiterate, contain the scale factor to load a smaller size bitmap that matches our image view if there are differences between the two. And again, we do have to ensure, which normally is by default, then just decode bounds to actually load the file. Okay, that part has now been done. So notice that when we click the image, we open up a camera application. It now saves the full-size bitmap to the image file. So we've got that now. Now we need to load that. We need to load that by using the set scale bitmap back into our image view. And to do that, it's just a matter of we go back down into this line here, and what we're going to do here is just comment out. We want to paste these lines here, and now I'm just going to comment them out. I'll explain why I'm doing that. And paste it back in. Okay, I just need to modify this method slightly because we're not using data here. That just holds the thumbnail, which is not desired for this particular tutorial. So all we want to check is if the activity was successful here. We can keep the remainder of the code here. And I just need to remove the code inside the brackets here. And this is a matter now. We can call our set scale bitmap. The code does all the work for us here. Okay, there's no errors or warnings, so the next step here is to run the code. Okay, the application's now started. Let me record that so you can see what's going on here. So it's just a matter of start camera application. Take a photo. Accept that. And as you can now see here, we've actually created another bitmap, but this is not a thumbnail. This should be a bitmap with a resolution matching our image view there. Okay, so what I want to do here now is I just want to step through the code changes we made. And to do that, we set up breakpoints. So set on click camera here. I want to put a breakpoint here just to talk about when we create our shareable content URI. We'll put one in the photo image view here, or just there. So basically what happens when we return back from the camera application. We'll talk about what happens when we create the file itself and how to scale the bitmap to our desired size, such as the ImageView size. And now we're going to run this in debug mode. And I don't believe I can record this one on debug mode. That's okay. I'll just talk you through it. Okay, so nothing's yet happened here, so we'll start the camera application. Okay, we're hitting our first breakpoint here. We're creating an image file. And if I step down through that, so we're going to create an image file there, and we'll put a breakpoint on that so I can continue. So we're creating it. We give it a timestamp so we have a unique name for each file. That's quite important. It's appending some readable text in front of that JPEG. And as you can see, the image file name is described here down in the variables. Now we're creating a storage directory to contain our images. And if the storage directory doesn't exist, we will create it. So as you can see, we've got the full location here, files, pictures. Now we're going to create a temporary file. And that's all successful there. Now we want to set up a variable that contains the path to that. And so if we look at image file path, it's showing us the full file path there. This is what's going to get passed across to that camera application, so the camera application knows it saves the actual bitmap, the photo it takes, to this location. And we can continue on. So we've created that. So the next step here is, yes, we create an intent, so we can call a camera application. We check to see if there are applications that do support the camera application functionality. Now we create an authority here, so we basically the authority, we're calling the right file provider with the right details and locations of the files we want to share. And now we create a shareable URI which has shareable permissions, so it can be used by the applications. And we put our intent into the camera intent with the details of the image URI using the media store extra output. And then it's just a matter of starting an activity with the intent. And the intent's got all the details, the application it wants to start, including the location URI of where it wants the image to be saved to. And now we just continue on. Camera application's now started. I will take a photo. Accept that. And now we've got back into the code here, so we've returned from the application. We're checking to see if the activity result is okay. It is, and this is where we're going to basically set the bitmap, but not the full-size bitmap image. Could have performance problems, or we could get an exception. So we're going to scale that. So basically, we want to have an idea of how the dimensions, the width and the height that we want to scale down to. And in this case, we know it's clear, it's the image view width and height. And now we need to set up the bitmap factory options here, so they will hold the bitmap width and height. And we just need to do a scanning read, not actually loading the bitmap itself. So we're setting them just decode bounds to true. And we're actually now going to populate our bitmap options object with all the details of the bitmap. And now we can get the bitmap width and the bitmap height. And now if we go down here, we can see the bitmap height and width are significantly larger than our desired width and height. So now we're going to work out the actual value, the differences for that. And it's a scale factor of 3. So in theory, we can reduce our bitmap image by a scale of 3, which is going to save significant memory. It's going to load faster and be more performant. And we're not going to see any out of memory errors or any other types of exceptions related to memory. Okay, so we feed that scale factor into our in-sample size, and now we're going to do a we're actually going to load a bitmap from the file. So we need to reset our ingest decode bounds to false. And now it's just a matter of decoding, actually getting the bitmap from that file. And if I continue on, we're going to set that to set bitmaps. So continue on. And I can see it here. I can actually see the scaled bitmap displaying there. Put it next to my face so you can see that as well. Okay, so that concludes this Kotlin Android tutorial. We moved on from the previous application, which is just loading a thumbnail, to actually loading a bitmap. And we also learned that if we want to pass a file URI to other applications, we need to set up shareable URIs for that with shareable file permissions, shareable content URIs for that. And that's for Android Nougat, and later that is required. It's a security thing. And so that's one thing to be aware of if you're using Android Nougat. And later, if you want to share files, you've got to use a file provider to create content URIs. We also covered the situation of that the bitmap's way too large for what we require. And we can get exceptions, and it can cause a huge performance overhead. We could have run out of memory. And so we learned how to set up a method where we could work out the scale factor between the bitmap resolutions, width and height, compared to our ImageView widths and heights, worked out the scale for that, and use that to scale down the bitmap before loading it into the ImageView. And finally, yes, we've just put the scaled bitmap into the ImageView. And that concludes this tutorial. If you want to get notified of any of the other tutorials I'm working on, don't forget to click on the subscribe button. And please do not post any questions to the YouTube comment sections. As you can gather, I receive thousands of questions on a regular basis. So you're just wasting your time. I can't even read them anymore. So I will respond to people with a quick thanks who, get something out of this tutorial, but I don't have time to read quite detailed questions sometimes, and just to absorb and digest an answer for that. I'd need to live to 2,000 years old if I'm going to have a chance of addressing the current questions, and they're coming in more and more. So please don't post any questions. But if you really do want my help for a particular issue, I do have a CodeMentor account where I provide consultancy services. They are paid consultancy services, so you do have to pay for them. But they're set up for those who really do require my help. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thank you for taking the time for watching. Bye for now.